Welcome to Bursa Malaysia's webinar on the fourth edition of the Corporate Governance Guide. My name is Kasturi Nathan and I will be bringing you through the Corporate Governance Guide, henceforth referred to as the CG Guide on behalf of Bursa Malaysia. In this webinar, we will cover the features of the Corporate Governance Guide, as well as the new and updated elements of the practices and step-ups of the Malaysian Code on Corporate Governance, otherwise referred to as the MCCG. In the Corporate Governance Guide, each write-up on a practice has three main sections. The why, which discusses the reasoning and value proposition of each practice and step-up. The how, which delves into the key considerations relating to the internalization and application of the practices and step-ups. And the where, to provide regional, international perspectives for users to be apprised on corresponding or related corporate governance practices in selected jurisdictions. Additionally, the write-ups on certain practices may include, where relevant, text boxes for further reflection on case studies and illustrative disclosures. We are happy to inform that an interactive PDF version of the CG Guide is now available for download. In the interactive PDF version, the guide in one page serves as a centralized depository for the write-ups on the practices where users can jump to specific write-ups through hyperlink attached to the respective titles. A navigation bar is also encoded at every page for readers to easily jump to desired write-ups on practices via guide in one page or the executive summary and the three pull-outs. The navigation bar also allows users to search for specific keywords. Next, hyperlinks and references are embedded throughout the document for readers' ease of reference to selected CG-related laws, regulations, and guidelines. Finally, pop-up dialog boxes appear throughout the guide when readers click on the practices, displaying the practices in verbatim. This serves as a quick and easy reference to the Malaysian Code on Corporate Governance, updated in April 2021, henceforth referred to as the MCCG. The CG Guide is structured into three pull-outs, which are reflective of principles A, B, and C of the MCCG. Write-ups on selected practices that are closely related are clustered to promote a holistic understanding of the intended outcomes. Moving on, as we begin to explore the details of the salient points covered under pull-outs 1, 2, and 3 of the CG Guide, the table here serves as an illustrative anchor showing the practices which will be discussed. The practices which have been selected for discussion here include the 12 new practices introduced in the latest version of the MCCG, as well as 8 existing practices which were updated. Firstly, we will start with the write-up on Practice 1.4 of the MCCG, which recommends that the chairman of the board should not be a member of the Audit Committee, Nomination Committee, or Remuneration Committee. Practice 1.4 was included under Intended Outcome 1.0 of the MCCG, which is related to ensuring that companies are headed by boards which assume responsibility for the company's leadership and is collectively responsible for meeting the objectives and goals of the company. Against this backdrop, Practice 1.4 allows objectivity of the chairman and the board to be preserved when deliberating on the observations and recommendations put forth by the said board committees. This is because the absence of the chairman from board committees eliminates instance of the same individual triple hatting as the judge, jury, and executioner. On that note, a form over substance view would suggest that the same position should be extended across any other board committees instituted by the company. For example, Risk Committee, Investment Committee, and Tender Committee. Data indicates that currently around 70% of the top 150 listed issuers in Malaysia have their board chairman being either a member or even the chair of such board committees. As such, a large portion of listed companies would find themselves taking measures to fill subsequent vacancies at the board committee level. This could serve as an opportunity for companies to reassess the board and board committee configuration and promote renewal or recalibration. Now we will explore the write-ups to 4 practices, namely practices 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, and 4.4, as well as step up 4.5 of the MCCG, pertaining to performing oversight on sustainability risks and opportunities in an integrated and strategic manner to support the company's long-term strategy and success. To start with, we will be touching briefly on the topic of sustainable development and where corporate sustainability or how triple bottom line features within this context. Let's start with sustainable development. The most widely used definition of sustainable development was introduced within the Brundtland Report of the World Commission on Environment and Development, in which it is defined as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Leap forward to 2015, the United Nations launched the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development as a plan of action for countries to address the needs of the people, planet, and prosperity in a holistic manner. Pledging to leave no one behind, the UN developed 17 Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, consisting of 169 targets to drive collective action towards sustainable development. I'm sure many of you are already familiar with these logos, as we will not go into details. However, we want to quickly highlight that the UN SDGs are country-level goals, meaning that each country is expected to put in place action plans to reach the 169 targets by 2030. In more recent years, the contribution of companies to sustainable development is usually described within the context of how they can contribute to the achievement of the 17 SDGs. While the SDGs are meant to be inclusive, where all societal stakeholders, from policymakers to civil society and down to every individual, have their respective roles to play, the contribution of the corporate sector is regarded as a critical component, in part due to the sheer amount of resources and capabilities at their disposal, towards achieving the objectives of the SDGs. As posited by the UN Global Compact, all companies can play a role in meeting the ambitious targets of the SDGs, from the way the businesses operate, how companies create value, to how they treat their employees. This is the essence of corporate sustainability. As such, companies are expected to balance their business and profit interests with environmental and social considerations. This balancing act can be underpinned by the Elkington's triple bottom line, often EES or triple P, people, planet, profit. Within the given context, we will now dive into the practices that revolve around the dimensions of sustainability, starting with practice 4.1 and step up 4.5. Both touch on the need to establish robust sustainability governance structures where oversight for sustainability is performed at the highest level, i.e. the board. On the other hand, strategic management of key sustainability risks and opportunities is led by senior management, preferably the C-suites. When businesses are large and complex, companies should appoint a designated chief sustainability officer to spearhead the management of material EES risks and opportunities. We must emphasize the fact that there is no ideal one-size-fits-all type of sustainability governance structure or arrangement. Instead, each company needs to put in place one that works best for them. Next, we move on to practice 4.2, which focuses on the effective communication of sustainability goals and strategies. In this regard, communication should include all key stakeholders, be it internal or external. Here, the boards play an integral role in communicating the company's goals and strategies pertaining to sustainability. For instance, boards should demonstrate a good understanding and also ensure that they provide meaningful, comparable, and balanced disclosures in their annual sustainability statements. To improve the credibility of these disclosures, they should subject the sustainability statements to an assurance process. Next, when engaging stakeholders, boards should endeavor to effectively capture as well as address the distinctive needs and expectations of key stakeholders. This puts the company in a good position to formulate effective responses. To assist boards, they can refer to BOARD steps in the CG guide on page 128. Jumping to practice 4.3, it is crucial for boards to be adequately equipped with pertinent knowledge, skills, and experience and/or expertise to effectively discharge their ESG oversight responsibilities. In this regard, boards can either upskill themselves or bring on board new directors with the requisite technical competencies in the area. Last but not least is practice 4.4, which highlights the need for periodic performance evaluations of the board and senior management. In general, the scope of board evaluations needs to be expanded to include ESG considerations. In this regard, companies may make use of the sample board evaluation questionnaire relating to ESG or sustainability on page 271. In terms of evaluating the performance of senior management in managing sustainability matters, boards should ensure that the relevant sustainability indicators are adopted. Once such indicators are in place, corresponding measurements, tracking, or collection of data should be undertaken. From adopted sustainability indicators, boards should then set appropriate targets to be achieved and explicitly tied to executive remuneration. For further guidance, please refer to the third edition of Bursa Malaysia Sustainability Reporting Guide and Toolkits available on Bursa Sustain. Next, we will look at some of the new and updated practices under the Intended Outcome 5.0 of the MCCG, which calls for the board's decisions to be made objectively in the best interests of the company, taking into account diverse perspectives and insights. The new practice 5.1 was introduced to assist the board to better address the fast-paced changes in the business environment and cater to the increasing view of shareholders on regular board refreshment to ensure the board has the necessary skills and expertise. Therefore, the nominating committee should devise an effective succession plan as well as board refreshment policy that are capable to address the longer tenure of directors and board entrenchment. Practice 5.3 outlines the limiting of the tenure of independent directors to a maximum of 9 years. This practice has been updated to preserve the directors' independence, both in substance and as perceived by key stakeholders. This is especially relevant for independent directors who are expected to constructively challenge proposed decisions of the board, as well as contribute in a meaningful manner to the strategic objectives and stewardship of the company. Given the long tenure of directors may potentially erode the board's objectivity, the board should consider tenure limit as a mechanism to facilitate board renewal and thus enhance the effectiveness of the board. It is worth noting that shareholders and major institutional investors also have views on the negative impacts of long tenure on independent directors, where many view that long service of an independent director would inevitably lead to a conflict of interest or impairment of objectivity. Along the same vein, we would like to remind as issuers that Bursa Malaysia has introduced a mandatory 12-year tenure limit for independent directors via an amendment to paragraph 1.01 of Bursa Securities Listing Requirements. Practice 5.5 relates to the appointment of board and senior management personnel. Appointing the right person with the right skills, experience, and credibility to the leadership team is clearly imperative. The fault lines drawn on instances of corporate governance mismanagement and scandals can often be traced to the failings of individual board and or senior management team members who have not had the values as well as the required skills, experience, and commitment to deal with challenges faced by the business. The importance of driving objective, meritocratic, and diversity-conscious appointments, at the leadership level is further amplified by the dynamic marketplace where companies need to be steered in an agile, responsive, and future-focused manner. In other words, in order to deliver good performance over the long term, the leadership team comprising board and senior management must now evolve to be more proactive. Given the non-negotiable importance of having a sound leadership team at the highest level of the company, Bursa Malaysia has emphasized the need for appointments to the board and senior management team to be anchored on suitable parameters. More specifically, Bursa Malaysia introduced the requirement for listed issuers to publish on their respective websites a fit and proper policy for the appointment and re-election of directors for both the listed issuers and also their subsidiaries, which was effected through the amendment to the listing requirements effective from 1st July 2022 onwards. As an incremental measure, it was outlined that there should be disclosure of application of the director's fit and proper policy in the nominating committee statement. This requirement will be applicable to all annual reports issued for the financial year ending on or after 31st December 2022. The CG Guide also covers select elements of the National Anti-Corruption Plan, for example, addressing the involvement and appointment of senior government officials as members of the board of companies. Next, we will move into the write-ups pertaining to two practices, namely practices 5.6 and 5.7. The intensifying nature of globalization, the emergence of novel technologies, and the continuous pressure on companies to innovate have heightened the need for professional boards. Board members are now increasingly expected to possess a granular understanding of the business model, ability to challenge assumptions underlying the strategies proposed, and scrutinize the risks that entail. Evidence from corporate governance failures has shown that the influence of informal networks on board appointments and opaque selection criteria are significant barriers to professionalization of boards. In order to reduce instances of insular nomination methods, regulators are increasingly emphasizing the importance of transparency and objectivity in directors' nomination, election, and re-election processes. Greater disclosures on the underlying processes of the individuals up for election and re-election allows for greater scrutiny by stakeholders and analysts, which ultimately can compel the board to recruit the most suitable candidates to form a high-functioning and effective board. Moving on, the expectation on gender diversity have escalated due to emerging trends in governance, changing business and social landscape. To this end, the write-up to two practices, namely Practice 5.9 and Practice 5.10, focus on the diversity at the board and senior management level, specifically gender diversity. A growing body of research and empirical studies has shown that the pursuit of diversity agenda makes business sense as companies that embrace diversity are associated with strong financial performance. It is also worthwhile to highlight that more institutional investors are establishing their voting guidelines with regards to board diversity. The push for gender diversity is also extending into the senior management composition, where stakeholders are increasingly expecting more women to be included in executive leadership roles and key decision-making positions. Hence, the establishment of a clear and accountable diversity policy is essential to foster a conducive environment where inclusivity, non-discriminatory, and merit-based practices can thrive. Over the years, board evaluation process has become an increasingly important element in measuring and improving board performance in areas such as leadership, culture, designation of duties, and decision-making. Against this backdrop, Practice 6.1 recommends that the board undertake a formal and objective annual evaluation to determine the effectiveness of the board, its committees, and each individual director. Board evaluation is an essential process for the board to examine itself to ensure that the board is operating efficiently and effectively. It has become an increasingly important element to measure and improve board performance in areas such as leadership, culture, delegation of duties, teamwork, and decision-making. Moreover, it is an essential exercise in ensuring that dynamics on the board is healthy. Another important process in relation to board evaluations is the need to disclose the details on how the evaluation process was conducted, as this can support stakeholders' formation of an opinion on the overall effectiveness of the board and individual directors. Key stakeholders are increasingly expecting externally facilitated board evaluations to be undertaken, which has also resonated with emerging leading practices and the demand for external objectivity in board evaluations. The main basis for an externally facilitated board effectiveness evaluation is that an external assessment conducted by an experienced and objective facilitator provides a more balanced, independent, and comprehensive picture of the board's functioning and effectiveness. As current business environment becomes more complex, shareholders are upping the intensity of their scrutiny of boards of directors, including during general meetings, especially on issues of remuneration. Crucially too, in order to ensure that their investments are well managed, shareholders are demanding their companies be led by directors and executives of good caliber. Here, remuneration plays a vital role in attracting and retaining highly skilled directors and executives. In attempting to hire and retain talent, it is important to understand that the complexity of remuneration is increasing with the growing forms of remuneration such as cash, benefits, shares, etc., and the variety of structures such as short, medium, or long term. In light of this, the write-up to Practice 7.1 in the CG Guide can be leveraged upon by companies in fulfilling the demand for fair and transparent remuneration policy and procedures, which should be aligned with the company's business and the individual's responsibilities, as well as the company's business strategy and long-term objectives. The write-up to Practice 9.2 has stipulated a requirement for the audit committee to preserve the integrity as well as credibility of the audit process and to allow informed decision-making by investors. In the effort to integrate the board governance and independence, this practice has been updated to cover non-key audit partners of external firms and to extend the cooling off period from 2 to 3 years, which entails the date between leaving the audit firm and the date of appointment to the audit committee. Having an audit performed by a competent third party who is viewed as having no interest in the financial success of the company has tremendous value to stakeholders and users of the company's financial statement. The global pandemic has brought about a shift in the deployment of technology to facilitate the conduct of general meetings. With the virtual setting being the new reality, practices 13.3, 13.4, 13.5, and 13.6 of the MCCG sheds light on how listed companies can better adapt technology to facilitate greater shareholders' participation and enhance the proceedings of general meetings. General meetings serve as key platform for shareholders to exercise rights and hold directors accountable for their action. It is an avenue for shareholders to challenge the board on issues of concern, discuss strategies for achieving the company's goals and objectives, and have their voices heard through votes cast by them. Hence, companies should undertake measures to encourage greater shareholder participation during general meetings, such as voting and participating in absentia, to promote participation and engagement at general meetings. Electronic voting would also enable proceedings to be managed in a more seamless manner for companies with large shareholding. As we ride the waves of technological advancement, there is an increasing appetite for fully virtual and hybrid methods. This is mainly driven by the fact that these means offer the potential for making shareholders' meetings more accessible for both retail and institutional investors alike, by removing the geographical barriers, travel requirements, and reducing other attendant costs. Continuing on the topic of general meetings, companies should be mindful of the fact that the summary of key matters discussed at the general meeting should be published on its website as soon as practicable after the conclusion of the meeting, in line with paragraph 9.212b of Bursa's securities listing requirements and as detailed in the write-up to practice 13.6 of the MCCG. Also, to many shareholders, the general meeting is the only opportunity to directly pose questions and comments to the company's board and management. Therefore, the recording of proceedings in the form of minutes, which reflects the mutual understanding, agreements, as well as resolutions reached between shareholders and directors of the company, should be made available to the shareholders in a timely manner. Even though we have provided an overview, a reading of the MCCG and the CG guide in its entirety will provide deeper insights into the higher standards of corporate governance Malaysia is aspiring towards. In fact, corporate governance is proving to be the bedrock of transformation initiatives at a global scale. For instance, the OECD Corporate Governance Committee is undertaking a review of the G20 OECD principles of corporate governance with the aim of strengthening corporate sector resilience through better risk management and to improve companies' access to finance from capital markets. The review was launched in November 2021 and will be completed in 2023. The review is underpinned by all facets of corporate governance, and the priority areas for the review are listed in the table. The parallels between these priority areas and the key issues addressed in the CG guide are evident. Closer to home, Bursa Malaysia is continuously pursuing reform initiatives in an integrated manner, with governance forming a key foundational piece. This is most recently seen in the public listed companies transformation program, which aims to help raise the stature of corporate Malaysia and increase the attractiveness of public listed companies in Malaysia. The program, which commenced in March 2022, will run through to 2025 and will see the publication of a series of 5 digital guidebooks focusing on topics that address purpose and performance, sustainability, stakeholder management and investor relations, digital enablement, and nation building. Simultaneously, the Bursa Malaysia Sustainability Reporting Framework has just been enhanced on 26 September 2022 to elevate the sustainability practices and disclosures of listed issuers. You can access third edition of Bursa Malaysia's Sustainability Reporting Guide and Toolkits via the Bursa Sustain website. With this, we have come to the end of the webinar. Please do scan the Bursa Sustain QR code on this slide to download Bursa Malaysia's 4th edition of the Corporate Governance Guide. Thank you.